Anchor Church was really birthed out of our heart to see the city of Sydney come to know Jesus. We were struck by the statistics, like nearly 4.5 million people who don't know Jesus. As we looked at the church, we saw that over 60% of people who attend churches are over the age of 50. And we realized that there is a desperate need for churches to reach the emerging generation, that people would come to church where they can hear about Jesus in a context that isn't off-putting. We had a vision that we would plant a church that would see our city radically transformed by the gospel as we made disciples of Jesus. That's really the vision and the heart behind Anchor Church.
Jesus will build his church. Jesus will draw people to himself. Jesus will continue to seek and save the lost. Jesus will see that the name of the Father is glorified. He will build his church.
I was really excited to be part of a church which was focused on the gospel and on mission. And it was really great to be with a bunch of people who were just focused on getting the word of Jesus out to the city.
I moved here at the beginning of the year to study, and I moved to a new city, not knowing anyone, not having any friends, and coming to Anchor, I felt like I was adopted into a family.
I remember just sitting in this restaurant with a bunch of maybe 10 or 12 people, and we're just chatting, and I was watching the interactions between these guys from Anchor, and it really just felt like I was at a family lunch. It was just cool seeing people love each other so well.
In about November of 2013, we moved from Mount Druitt to Alexandria. It was a bit of a change. And in the beginning of 2014, we began to pray in our living room with about 18 people and ask that God would begin a work in our city. As we shared our vision, what God had put on our hearts, God began to grow our team and gather more and more people. And we got to about 25 people in our living room, and we outgrew it. We needed a new space to meet. So we moved to our first venue, which was upstairs in the Hive Bar. And we began gathering in this small little room. It was hot, it was February, 40-degree heat, and we were singing off our phones. We had our mobile phones there, and we were looking up lyrics and singing off our phones. And the very first Sunday we met in the Hive Bar, I preached a sermon from Luke 15, the prodigal son story, and really that was the heart of our vision, to see a gospel awakening happen in our city. And the message was that if we were desperate to see a gospel awakening in our city, that needed to firstly begin in our own hearts and in our own church before it would ever reach our city. Around about that time, we began to meet in gospel communities. We met in 4 gospel communities across our city, 2 in the city, 2 in the inner west. We really just began to share stories of what God had been doing in our lives. And it was a wonderful time of getting to know people, of connecting in gospel communities, of people sharing their stories, of celebrating the evidences of God's grace in people's lives. During that season, as we shared our vision, people began to get excited and capture the heart for our church. And God grew that team to about 35 people, and we outgrew that little space at the Hive, and we moved over to the band room at the Roxbury Hotel. It was a great room. It was dark, it was dingy, it had aircon, and we began to really cement our foundation there for a church that would be in community and on mission and for Jesus. At the end of that season, God had gathered about 43 people to our core team, and it really felt like Anchor was a bit like a Coke can that had been shaken up. We were a church that was full of expectation, full of excitement and enthusiasm about what God was going to do in the season ahead for us. So during that season at the Roxbury, we began to search for a more permanent space to meet in, and we looked at probably close to 100 buildings across our city. We checked out buildings in our area, buildings way outside of our area, and we found one building that we thought could work. It was way out of our price range. We were looking at about a $60,000 financial risk that we were going to take. And at the 11th hour, God provided an amazing window for us. I got a phone call from Brian to say, come and check out this building. It was called the Pact Center for Emerging Artists. It was a blank canvas, a black room, floor to ceiling, great space, fit our vibe, had room for kids. But not only that, it was affordable. It was way cheaper than any other building we had looked at across the city. And it was so clear to us that this was an evidence of God's grace. He had provided the building that was not only suitable, but affordable for us. And so we began to meet at the Pact Center for Emerging Artists. We started meeting in that building just before Easter, and we had a massive working bee to clean the place up and began to pray. And we had a couple of weeks of prayer and fasting and asking that God would pour His Spirit out on this city and draw many people to know Jesus, that we would be inviting some of our friends to our launch, and that God would begin to do a wonderful work there. On the 18th of May 2014, Anchor Church publicly launched, and we had around about 330 people in our building on the day. It was a wonderful day, a wonderful celebration, a great way to mark the start of what God was going to do in our community. And I preached from Luke chapter 18, the Pharisee and the tax collector, and we preached the gospel, that we need the gospel. Every single one of us, those who have been walking with Jesus for years need Him, and those who have been walking far from Jesus need Him. And we saw God do a wonderful work on that day. We saw Him draw people to us. We had about 20 people on our very first Sunday who said, we want to make this church home. We want to call this family. We had a number of people who were really impacted by the gospel. We think a number of people got saved on that day. And that day was the day that really marked the start of our church going public. And it was a really exciting season for us. And from that point on, God just began to grow and work in our community. Anchor doubled in size every 6 months from the beginning of January 2014. After we launched, we had 20 people wanting to join our gospel communities. We just weren't expecting the type of interest that we had in what we were doing. We had new people moving to the city that were looking for a new church to be a part of. We had other people who were coming to us desperate for the kind of community that we were building at Anchor.
Meeting up with a bunch of people in a smaller setting. We call it our gospel community, and we kind of share each other's lives with each other. We share our joys and our struggles, and what's been amazing is just watching people who wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable or really confident sharing their faith with people have just all of a sudden been bold in sharing their faith in Jesus with people on the street, and more importantly with their closest friends and family, watching their joy as they do that. It's been amazing for us to watch.
By the end of last year, we had close to 80 people in gospel communities, 100 people on average attending on Sundays, and God grew what He had started at Anchor Church. Launch is easy. It's easy to launch a Sunday gathering. It's easy even to cast a vision and talk about seeing a city transformed, but what's hard is actually living that out. And so the highlight for me was to see people get our vision and to make it their own, to begin to live that vision out. We had a huge vision to see our city transformed, and it was almost like it was too big. It was too big for us. And so we had to break that down into a manageable vision. And what we asked our people at Anchor to do was to think of 5 friends that they loved and wanted to know Jesus, and begin to pray for them and be really intentional about sharing the hope of Jesus with their friends.
So I remember a couple of months ago, there was a man who was just walking past where we gather in Erskineville, and he was homeless, and Josh, who was on welcoming that day, just met him and invited him into church. And he came in, and then we realized that he was quite needy and he was homeless. And so a couple of friends invited him out to lunch, and they paid for his meal, and then they invited him back to their place for dinner. and to stay the night just saw the love of Christ in a real tangible way that day.
Something that's been really cool in our GC is we've done winter drinks. And so what we've done is we've gone into Summerhill in the village and we've served winter drinks as hundreds and hundreds of commuters are getting off the train and walking back to their homes. And for the most part, all of Summerhill gets off the train, they walk right past the village square to get to their houses. And what's happened is we've begun to build traction and people have started to get to know us and recognize us. And after the second month of doing it, we met this guy, Jack. He came along and he's like, I don't believe in God, but I just love seeing your guys' generosity and see what you're doing. And he said, can I come back next week? He's like, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. And we're like, yeah, man, come back. He's like, I want to help you. So we're like, yeah, came over to the house, started helping us mixing the hot chocolate. And it was just great to have a part of our family, even though, he didn't believe in the same Jesus that we believed in. And so by the second month, he was there helping. The third month, he's like, can I come back again? And he came again, but this time after going, he went to an event with Steve Vassallo, another guy in the church, and went to hear the gospel message, and he put his faith in Jesus. And it was the most exciting thing to see fruit from us just faithfully going out and serving, warm drinks in Jesus' name, without preaching at people, but just by loving on people and them seeing a difference in us. And so, Jack's kind of the first fruits of Anchor as far as someone that's put their faith in Jesus. And I've just been amazed seeing him grow in his walk and passionately falling in love with Jesus and being baptized. So it's a real victory for the church, and to see, real fruit. It's been exciting.
We're excited about the future of Anchor Church. Our hope is to see gospel communities scattered across our city, across the inner west. We want to see people continuing to build relationships with those who need to hear the hope of Jesus. We want to be a church that is confident in the transforming power of the gospel, a church that believes that God is going to be at work in this city. We want to be a church planting church. In fact, we believe in this so much that we've set aside 9% of our annual budget, that at some future point, as God calls and God leads us by His Spirit, that we would plant new churches across this city. We believe that the best is yet to come for Anchor. We're optimistic, not because of us, not because of our giftedness, but because of God, because of the nature of the gospel. And we're not just optimistic for our church, we're optimistic for all of the churches across this city that love Jesus and preach the gospel for His fame and His glory.